capital. And of course that influences everything else. Even European rulers who didn't like Jews were nevertheless finding a Jew to be Secretary of the Treasury, because they knew how to do it. Their people didn't. So again and again they found themselves in influential positions because of that.
Now, isn't it in the Quran that you can't get interest?
From an Israelite.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can from a Gentile.
You can't get interest.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
The Quran.
Quran.
Well, the Muslims believe that too.
That's right.
Oh,
That's right.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
And you know, then in all these other fields, well, let's just take a little cultural look at Jewish history. We know where the Jews were in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed, Jerusalem was destroyed. They had already scattered. There were lots of them in Babylonia, lots of them in Egypt. They were already an international presence, but not much in Europe. With the destruction of the temple, they had to go somewhere. They went wherever they could go. Since it was the Roman Empire, the places to go were places where the Russian Empire had seaports and, you know, developing urban centers and things like that. That's where they went. That's where you could get a boat to. And so we find them all along the Mediterranean, in Marseille, and all the Italian cities along the coast, and in Sicily. And wherever they went, they formed a community and found themselves subject to Christian persecution everywhere. There was no non-Christian persecuting part of the world. Sometimes the persecution became so bad they just had to move, and then they hoped it would be better elsewhere. Their history is a history of moving and then having it come there, and we move again. Remember Fiddler on the Roof? That's a very good little dramatization of it. So for the most part, it was a survival practice. What they tried to keep alive as their culture was their religion, and therefore, you know, everybody studied the Talmud, studied the scripture, and so on. But that was about it. It did, however, make them literate. And being literate was a pretty useful thing to be. As soon as they began, you know, involving themselves in international negotiations and so on, you know, there were no cell phones then. If you couldn't read and write, you couldn't do that. That was the way you sent messages. But they couldn't do much else. Then in the late 18th and 19th century, early 18th and late 17th century, came the Enlightenment in Europe. The Enlightenment brought in, you know, all the things that kind of American ideology are based on. The equality of everyone, human rights, equal rights, freedom of speech. You know, the Bill of Rights essentially is all Enlightenment stuff. And, you know, the Jews looked at that and said, that's got to include us. And it did. And so for the first time, you know, in 1800 years, the Jews were free to develop their talents like other people. And boy, did they. I mean, it's really kind of incredible. The number of philosophers, scientists, artists that come out of this. In a very short time, even from now, you know, 18th century till now, is not that long. You know, just think down a list of great classical musicians. You find about half of them are Jews. And so in the other, you know, great writers and so on. And obviously great businessmen. The movie industry is Jewish from the start.
Their culture, for so much a heavy emphasis on education, number one.
Yes.
And literacy.
Yes.
And then, of course, with that music, and a lot of that they have really came from, whether it be the synagogue or originally the temple.
Well, no, in the Enlightenment it came from their Christian neighbors.
That's about 1750, 55.
Yeah, yeah. You know, what they brought from the synagogue was their religious traditions and their literacy, which was always a great social asset.
And sense of family also. Cohesion.
Yeah, oh yeah, very much so, very much so. But in the Enlightenment, that meant that they were now free to develop schools like other people had, go to schools that other people had, learn the things and teach the things that other people learned and taught. It also meant that they were immersed in an alien culture. And that led, as it always leads, to some being scared to death of it. We're losing our Jewishness, we're losing our biblicism in this Enlightenment culture, back off, become a resistance group. And others saying, plunge into it. Find our way within it, it's there, let's use it, let's join it, let's develop it. Very much the same as way back in the Hellenistic occupation of Palestine. Remember when someone said, what, the Jews, we could be like Greeks, And many of them went that way. That was when the Bible became the Septuagint, translated into Greek. The Bible that Paul read and Jesus read was in Greek. It was not in Hebrew. We had a great Jewish philosopher, Philo, in Egypt, all under this Hellenistic rule. And then you had the others, this is bad stuff. We don't want our kids going to those schools where they learn those nasty things and so on. So very much the same again. Sudden immersion in a culture that you can join for a traditional community means some will, by some quirk of temperament, say this is scary, we don't want any. And we don't want our kids to even know it's there. And others say this is a great opportunity, let's plunge in. And that gave rise to divisions between accommodating and resisting Jews. I mentioned before the
conservatives versus the liberals, right?
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of.
In a sense, yeah.
You know?
Yeah, but liberal meant pretty much joining up.
Okay.
Joining up with the Gentile intelligentsia. We said before that Judaism had previously been divided into two big geographical groups. The Ashkenazi
Sephardi.
and the Sephardim. Ashkenazi was the Hebrew word for German. Sepharda was the Hebrew word for Spain. Germany and Spain. So the Sephardim were mostly from the Iberian Peninsula, and then once the Catholic monarchs who sent Columbus to us kicked all the Jews out of Spain, many of them came to North America, South America, and a great many of them went to North Africa. So Sephardim become the Jews from North Africa and from the Iberian Peninsula and from the colonies of those places. Interestingly, we were in really the only American city where the first Jewish settlers were Sephardic. Not Ashkenazi. These are not the Jews of Chicago and New York. These are the Jews of Lisbon and Madrid. Yeah.
There is a very good, in James Missioner's novel, The Source, they have a real good presentation of Ashkenazi and Sephardim going in their history, but also of, as Missioner does, tell a beautiful story about it.
Actually, yeah, I think I read that, but I don't, a long time ago.
Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah. The Sephardim's subsequent history tends to be pretty unsensational, pretty conservative, and continues to be, right down until now. They tend to be traditionalists, be conservatives. I mean, not, extremely conservative, but habitually conservative. The Ashkenazi have always been much more adaptable and adjustable, partly because they originated in a part of the world, Germany and Eastern Europe, where all kinds of things were going on. Not much was going on where the Sephardim lived. I remember some years ago, I had a Chicago Jewish student in class, and he told me that still he found old family New Orleans Jews an alien culture to him. And he said, you know, and I know why. I mean, it's a Sephardic way of looking at things. And I have an Ashkenazi way of looking at things. We're all Jews, but we kind of live in different worlds. The Ashkenazi, as I say, were intensely persecuted down to the Enlightenment. At the time of the Enlightenment, they were given the alternative of joining up with the Gentiles and participating in their culture, or resisting. The strong joining up movement was what became Reform Judaism. Its ancestor was Mendelssohn.
Really?
Not
Mendelssohn?
no, not the one you mean. Moses Mendelssohn,
Okay.
who was a philosopher and an advocate of the idea that his basic view was that what the Bible gave, what Jews had, was a way of life. That was what the Torah was. This was instructions on how to live in society. It was not a bunch of dogmas. That was his main emphasis. And therefore it could never be like Catholicism, where you have all these statements that you have to profess belief in. Their only statement to profess belief in is God is one. But what they had instead was the law. Moses Mendelssohn was very historically enlightened, and he saw what we've been seeing again and again, that within the Bible itself you could see the law evolving and changing as new circumstances arise. He said, well, why stop? You know, it should go right on doing that. And we should continue to use the principles of, of the Torah, but we should accommodate them to our own circumstances. And that, I mean, you can see where that will lead. It will lead to a greatly modified religion and a much more flexible religion. And a religion open to a great variety of views about almost everything.
So he kind of started the reform movement, do you
He
think?
really did, yeah. All Reform Jews will see him as their kind of intellectual or spiritual ancestor. There were others who did the organizing work later on. The Orthodox were the others. I mean, there's no founder of Orthodoxy. The Orthodox were just those from whom the Reform departed. So there's not like somebody came and founded a Reform Judaism, somebody else founded an Orthodox Judaism. Orthodox Judaism, in their view, is what was there all the time. This is often likened to the Reformation, where the Catholic position is we are the Christianity that was there all the time, and you guys are the innovators. Whereas Luther and company were saying quite the contrary. We are the ones going back to the religion of Jesus and the New Testament, and you guys are the innovators with all your saints and sacraments and stuff like that. So you had the same kind of thing there. And in general, the more vigorous the Reformed Jews became, the more rigid the Orthodox became. It was just a reactionary kind of thing. Then we did have another movement called Conservative Judaism. And this was an attempt to kind of find a middle way between Reform and Orthodox. Conservatism Judaism is now, I think, the most populated kind of Judaism in the United States. Reform would be second, Orthodox rather small. Conservative Judaism basically adhered to traditional practices, but was open to intellectual modification. So, we can think new thoughts, but we still do the same stuff. We have synagogue worship, we do the Sabbath, all of that. So we behave the same as ever, but we now think new thoughts because, time has gone on and we know things now we didn't know before. We know that the Bible was not written by Moses. We know that it was not written all at once or anything like that. These were people who were, quite enlightened about biblical scholarship too early. So that's basically how these things came about. Reform Judaism adapting to the Enlightenment, Orthodox Judaism saying to them, Conservative Judaism saying there's a middle way between these two. And they're the main things that are around now. The irony, of course, is that all these Judaisms were developed in the Enlightenment period, and that was a period where the Jews refer to that period as the Haskalah, means the emancipation. We're finally out of this Christian jail. We can now, they thought of their history as being mostly in a Christian jail, in ghettos, in prisons, subject to the Inquisition.
Haskalah? How do you spell it?
Haskalah, Haskalah. So they thought the good times had come at last. We can now show people what we can do, and we'll do it. And then came the new wave of anti-Semitism, then came the political adoption of that by the Nazis, and then came the Holocaust, etc. If you have any of you been to Jerusalem? Yeah. Well, in Jerusalem, there's a wonderful monument, I think, which takes the form of a long tunnel. Did you go through that then? Yeah. It's like a museum in the form of a tunnel. You go in this dark entrance, and you walk through the history of Judaism. There are exhibits all over the place. And there are bends in they're all symbolic. There are kind of bends in the tunnel. And things sort of brighten up and then they darken again. And you get some persecution, some huge persecution.
Is that different from the Shrine of the Book?
Oh yeah, totally. Okay. Yeah, this is a big and very modern thing. And then you get to the Enlightenment and the lights are on and everything, people are writing great books and doing great music and so on. And then you take the next bend and the darkness comes again. And you walk through that, it gets darker and darker and darker and darker to the Holocaust where it's pitch black. And then if you go through the Holocaust, you take another bend, and that's the end of the tunnel, which is the edge of a cliff. And you look out the end of it, and you see Jerusalem.
Wow.
It's a magnificent design. So
it must be like
Jerusalem got us out of this one.
20 years old, or maybe.
Oh, at least, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, what a trip.
Hasidic Jews, just extreme Orthodox Jews?
No. Hasidic Jews are reformers, but let me see, what could I liken them to? Hasidic Jews are to Judaism kind of like Amish and Mennonites are to Christians. Back to the origins, very simple, basic existence. They developed in the Ukraine and in Poland, and that's why they dress the way they do. They're wearing the outfit that people wore then. So what did you ask me, the way you asked it, maybe?
Well, I was just thinking they seem so rigid and whatever that I thought maybe it was.
They're more rigid than the Orthodox.
Okay.
Yeah. And very, Orthodox Jews are perfectly willing to participate in everyday life with everybody else. I mean, they can be, elected governor if anybody will vote for them. They're college professors and things like that. Not Hasidim. Hasidim educate their own kids in their own way. They wear their own clothes. They live in their own neighborhoods. And they're always a separate community, and they want it that way. There are a lot of them now in this country, and lots of them in Israel. Another thing that should be mentioned is the after the Holocaust, there was, of course, a strong development in Zionism. And Zionism was a movement called that Back to Zion, Zion being Jerusalem, the hill Jerusalem's on. Reform Jews were enthusiastic about this. Orthodox Jews were very much against it. They considered that the diaspora was the diaspora, Jerusalem was all over, we have to go on from there and make our way in the rest of the world.
1939, Zionism?
Or earlier than that. Zionism goes back to the last century, the beginnings of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What changed things was actually the Holocaust, finally. The Orthodox said, you know, we can do fine as Jews of the diaspora, but the Holocaust gave them second thoughts. And after the Holocaust, many of the Orthodox joined Zionism, were in favor of the state of Jerusalem.
1948.
1948 was the actual state.
Yeah, yeah.
That's when I was born.
Me too.
Oh.
Not me. I had a beard by then. Okay, I mean, this is just a sketchy kind of thing, but it fills in some of these blanks, I think. Any questions about them that I can say anything to?
Well, what I'm getting is that if all I know about somebody is that they're Jewish, I don't really know a lot.
That's
There's
right.
so many variations.
Yeah.
So,
And within Reform Judaism, I mean, you have, you know, all kinds of philosophical and theological views. Reform Judaism is open to agnosticism. You know, maybe, you know. I go to the synagogue service because, you know, maybe, you know. And it's our tradition, so I go. You know, well, we have a lot of Christians who are celebrating Christmas who don't believe a word of it. So it's the same thing there. So Reform Jews are range all the way from agnostic to, you know, pretty dogmatic tradition.
The Orthodox Jews with the two separate kitchens, basically. That's not in the Torah, is it?
You mean the
They have
Separating
rules
meat
that
from
Yeah.
you know,
the dairy.
well, it isn't in the Torah, but they derive it from the Torah because the Torah specifies the way things ought to be cooked, say for the Sabbath and for the holidays. And it was concluded after a while we can't mix them. You know, if you're trying to do them both together, the obliged cleanliness will be affected by the other food. So you have one place for cooking everyday ordinary food, and another one for cooking food for, you know, for ritual use. That's how it came about. So it's not in the Torah, but the reason for it is considered to be in the Torah.
and only Orthodox Jews.
Hmm?
Really, only Orthodox follow that. Though,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
so keeping kosher is sort of peculiar to Orthodox. Kind of.
Kind of, yeah. Reform Jews will often kind of go part way with it. Then it's also complicated by the fact that a lot of kosher food is delicious. And all kinds of, you know, Jewish delicacies have been developed. So a lot of them just say, we like it. I mean,
Yeah, well.
you know, who wants your bloody old steak? We'd rather have it.
What about that? What is it called? Kabbalah?
Yeah.
What is all that?
Okay. This developed in Spain, and that is a development of the Sephardim. It was developed mainly by a man named Gaon, G-A-O-N. And it's mystical Judaism, essentially. That is to say, this was a form of Judaism that felt it could dispense with all the trappings. You didn't need to go to the synagogue. You didn't need to do any of that kind of social, religious stuff. You found God in your own way. Mysticism, in every religion spawns a mysticism.
So it's been around for a while.
It's been around for a while. It's been around since the late Middle Ages. And, but often with mysticism also, what begins as a kind of spirituality turns into a kind of superstition. And that happened with Kabbalism. You get all kinds of little amulets and magical sayings and things like that. There's one town in Jerusalem that is a Kabbalistic town, and it attracts tourists because they're selling all these magical amulets and things like that. I think I still have that, yeah. A key ring with a warding off of the evil eye on it. so warding off on the evil eye, it's a kind of...
Hollywood has gotten into.
Oh, very much so, yeah. I mean, Hollywood has had a lot of Jewish influence, and then a number of celebrities started going in that. For some reason, celebrities look for funny things. I mean, look at the number that went to Scientology, which is totally nuts. Just a total fake. So there is still mystical Kabbalism in the old thing, but there's also a lot of almost, how would you put it? Yeah, almost
Cultish?
magical. And supposedly you can be Kabbalistic and be any of these other things, but of course the Orthodox would have nothing to do with that. But you can be Reform and Kabbalistic, and most Kabbalistic are Reform. So it's a mystical movement, and that's something we haven't given a lot of attention to in this course because we don't have that much time. But every religion develops a mystical outlet somewhere. And certain religions are initially very hostile to it. And the religions that were initially most hostile to it were Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Because mysticism means you can skip all this stuff. You don't need a Bible or a Quran or a Torah. You got God, you know? And you can go right to God. And therefore, they were considered to be atheists.
Kabbalah is spelled with a K?
Yeah. Yeah, they spell a lot of ways, but K-A-B-B-A-L-A-H. So the same thing happened with them all. You know, if you read the lives of who are now great Christian mystics, you find they always got a kicking around. The Vatican was always sending spies and people to check on their orthodoxy and so on. And some of them squeaked through and some didn't. I mean, some were turned over to the Inquisition. The same thing happened in Judaism, and this was the survivor. This was the kind of mysticism that survived.
So he wrote a lot, or?
He wrote a lot, yeah. Incidentally, they both have a language. Sephardim has a language which not too many people know, called Ladino. And it was kind of a blend of Hebrew and Spanish. And Ashkenazi have one people do know, Yiddish, which was a blend of German and Hebrew.
Would that be connected to Latin?
Oh yeah,
On the
because they're from Spain and all, the Latin world, yeah, Ladino. Ladino still exists, but it's not widely used anymore. Yeah, so I just want to emphasize that mysticism always arises. In some religions it rises naturally and peacefully and quietly, you know, as for example in Hinduism and so on. And in others, notably the three religions of the book, it has a violent entry and not much hospitality for a long, long time. And that was true in, you know, for the Jews we get Kabbalism, for Christians we get a variety of Christian mystics, and in Islam we get the Sufi.
Sufi?
Sufi, S-U-F-I. We'll be saying something about them afterwards. And they all had, you know, difficult beginnings and trouble persuading people that, they were okay, and usually martyrs, and they're martyred by their own religion, not by somebody else. Okay, we better move on. Yes, I'm glad somebody brought up the mysticism thing.
What do you call getting interest on money? I forget the word.
Usury if it's too much.
Usury.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Like usurious interest means the kind of interest you pay on your credit card.
Or payday loans.
Right. Yeah, usury was condemned by all of them, Christians. It was John Calvin who finally formulated an argument that lending at interest was okay, on the grounds that most people consider it okay now. I mean, if I'm giving you a lump of my money, then I can't do anything with it. While you got it, I should get some recompense for that. So Calvin maintained that taking something for lending your money was legitimate, but it must be very moderate. You can't hurt people, you can't be extortionary in that way.
Not like these days.
Not like payday
Not like
loans.
these days.
Right. And after Calvin, others went the same way. But curiously, there's a good book on usury in the Catholic Church by a famous Catholic judge. The Catholic Church never quite accepted usury except in practice. I mean, every diocese is borrowing and lending and so on, but the doctrine is still intact. Yeah, there's a book called A Church That Cannot But Must Change, and that's in there. It deals with that, deals with slavery. The Catholic Church did not condemn slavery as immoral in the universal statement until, well within our lifetime. After Vatican II. Vatican II was the first condemnation of slavery officially by the Catholic Church. But every other Christian church had condemned it long before.
Isn't that something?
But it's part of just traditionalism. It's there, you can't change your mind about something without the whole structure being threatened. I think that's one of the great institutional weaknesses of the Catholic Church. And you got to be able to say we had that one wrong, or maybe it was okay for then, but not now. We can never bring ourselves to say that. You can see that with the contraception thing too.
Still.
Where the Pope gets his own hand-picked experts to work on this, their unanimous view is that this is obsolete and is not demanded by any, really basic Catholic doctrine. And then the Pope comes and says it's still on. And we know now quite clearly he was tortured by this. That this was, I either have to say the Catholic Church had it wrong, and all these married couples were kind of made miserable by a doctrine that we didn't have to have.
And they didn't follow it though.
Well, some did.
Some did,
yeah. And some were made miserable by it.
Yeah, true.
Or some didn't
True.
follow it and then had
Yeah.
terrible guilt feelings because the church
Right.
says this is wrong.
Right.
Who wrote the book about the church that can't change but must?
Oh,
Google it.
I know the man. This is a senior moment, I think. I'll think of it.
But birth control and abortion are two entirely different issues.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but birth control, all these countries that are having babies, and, and we don't even show them rhythm or anything.
Yeah.
And they're having these children, and the children are starving, and the children are suffering, and
Yeah.
And the church is going, well, we're not gonna even hand out condoms.
Mm-hmm.
It's just nuts.
Yeah, it kind of
It's
is.
just nuts, I think. But,
But it's that old thing, you know, you can't say we had it wrong or even it got to be wrong. You know, what happened, you just kind of let things fade away. I mean, there were some things that were never retracted, but we just don't bother about them, like usury, you know.
right.
Maybe the same thing will be happening there. The present Pope has been very criticized for not making more of contraception, but that may be part of the same thing, kind of letting it slide, and letting people just follow their consciences on.
You know, he doesn't have the final word. He's got the cardinals, all those old men. Although I don't have anything against old men. I do not, but they do, you know, have pressures on them.
Wisdom.
Oh, he has a lot of pressure on him, yeah.
Yeah, that's why.
And also the realization that,
Yeah.
you know, people would say this was wrong and we were dominated by it all these years. I mean, that's a hard thing. There's no easy way to go.
No, right.
No.
The whole structure will come apart.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very distracted. I'm still trying to remember the name. No, it'll come to me.
Doesn't anybody have a smartphone that can look that up?
Yes, yes,
It's
yes. yes,
Noonan, Henri
yes.
Noonan.
Yeah, right.
John Newman.
Who?
Oh, John
Noonan.
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 Oh, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, he's
I didn't know it, she Googled it.
Thank
who is really a remarkable man. He's a
Was a Notre Dame.
federal court justice in California. One of his incarnations. He was chairman of the theology department at Notre Dame. I mean, that's quite a combo.
John Noonan.
John Noonan, yeah.
Noonan. Was
Yeah,
he
I
related
know
to?
him reason. I haven't known him
Well, you
conversation.
know, Henri Noonan, the writer.
Yeah,
Are they related on one?
No,
Oh.
no. No, he's a Bostonian originally, this guy. Yeah, and he wrote a whole book on the usury question. And several others. But that one, a church that can and cannot change, is if you want to read him, that would be the thing to read.
Church that cannot change.
That can and cannot change.
Great title.
John Newman. The church that cannot change. The church that cannot. No.
And he wrote the definitive work on contraception too,
That's good.
because he was one of the people the Pope picked to decide whether contraception was a traditional prohibition or not. And he said, no, it's not. And he argued this, you know, the whole history of the church, all the way through. He says again and again and again, you find contraception condemned, but it's never for the same reason. So, and he said, whenever you see something like that in legal history, you know, where we keep doing this, but the reason keeps changing, you know, you just have a kind of mindless traditionalism there. You know, it's got to be wrong, but it couldn't be wrong for that reason. Let's find another reason. So that controversy too is, he's the best source on that. So the Pope picked him, and I've talked to him both before and since that. And he said the commission was not interfered with, and he said we were absolutely unanimous. And these were the Pope's hand-picked experts
Wow.
from all over the world. They were unanimous, and it didn't do it.
Well, what we need here are women. We do, in the church. We do.
Which pope was that?
Yeah, which pope was this?
Paul the
Pius
Sixth.
Pius XII.
Pius the 12th. Oh, it goes that far back. Wow.
Do you think that?
Oh, you mean,
The commission with Noonan.
no, that's Paul VI.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that that may be a deterrent for his being canonized?
For who's being canonized?
Paul the Sixth.
Yeah. Was canonized, he's a saint, yeah.
I don't know, we mean the contraception
Yeah.
controversy. I don't see how that would, I don't see how that would stand in the way.
Yeah, I would think so too.
Well, he
Yeah.
had a thing about, with women. I mean, he was a saint and everything, but Paul VI did not speak up for women well.
No, but who did?
Well, Francis is.
Oh, Francis is, yeah. But, I mean, Paul VI was actually himself, quite liberal.
True, in his time.
He had been chaplain of the communist group in Milano.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he just felt trapped by this. It is uniform teaching in the Catholic Church, whatever all these guys say, even though they give different reasons, the conclusion is always the same. And I'm not going to be the Pope who says that we've had it wrong for 1,500 years.
What's the name of the Shakespearean character that he's likened to?
Hamlet.
It's not Macbeth.
Hamlet.
Hamlet.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. The Italians talk about Hamletismo. Yes, they were back and forth, shall they?
Yeah.
Okay. John Noonan, yeah, I don't know why his name went, but I'm glad somebody found it. You found it.
Yeah. You're gonna read it, aren't you, Barbara?
He's a remarkable man. He also did a critique of the Latin translation of the liturgy, the new Latin translation of the liturgy. He's classically educated. And he said it was really bad Latin. And he argues that, line by line and verse by verse. He said, we have people who know real Latin. This is obviously done by, an amateur. At the same time, he's a very tactful man. I mean, he's never a rabble-rouser or anything like that. He quietly presents the evidence. As you can see, I'm a great admirer.
Yeah. I wonder if he has a website.
Okay. Islam.
You gonna do that in 3 minutes?
I don't like that.
Well, it's 11:52.
Maybe we could do a kind of rap on it. Islam is an Arabic word meaning submission. Meaning submission. It's an ordinary word. It can mean submission by anybody to anyone or anything. But with the coming of this religion, Islam took on the meaning of submission to the will of God. So Islam is the religion of those who submit to God's will as they know it. That's the whole idea of it. Now, we've talked about these groups before. Take the consonants out, and you get, and from that you get things like salam, meaning peace. The idea is that peace is to be achieved only by submitting to the will of God. So the typical Muslim greeting is salam, salam alaikum, and that has a religious basis. If you submit to God, you will enjoy peace. If you don't, you won't.
We have the same thing in our Bible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the word is just a word, but it takes on that religious meaning. Allah is the Arabic word for God. I remember going to a service in Lebanon, a Christian church service, and noticed that we were all praying to Allah. And your first reaction, did I stumble into a mosque by accident? I mean, Allah is just the Arabic word for God. So all references to God. Again, people kind of think, there's another God named Allah, and we have one named God. But it's just a translation. So with those two words out of the way, once upon a time, in 571, an orphan boy was born in Mecca. Mecca was the leading city of the Arabian Peninsula. The other almost as great city was Medina, called Yathrib back then. And the rest of Arabia, a huge place, the rest of the Arabian Peninsula was dotted with oases, some of which had little towns built into them. But for the most part was populated by nomadic Arabs. And these nomadic Arabs were like other nomadic peoples that we've talked about in other contexts. They were raiders, they were takers of booty, they were horsemen, they were very good at what they did, and that was basically their business, kind of like the old Aryans up north. And their social unit was the family or the clan grown out of the family. So this is a very sketchy. You have these two real cities, some towns and oases, and then this vast expanse populated by wandering, raiding, violent, very powerful and courageous Arab horsemen. Yeah.
Jim, you said Aryan.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean Northern Germanic?
No, I'm talking the Aryans from which Vedic Hinduism comes.
Okay.
Yeah. They come originally from kind of the steppelands of Russia and Eastern Europe. Okay. So in 571, in Mecca, an orphan boy named Muhammad, being an orphan, needed protection, and families always took care of people like that, and the obvious one to take care of him was his uncle, Abu Talib. Abu Talib had done this for other orphan kids related to him, so he had almost a little domestic orphanage there, but it was not institutional, they were all brought into the family. And he would take care of them as best he could until they were old enough to get a job, and then they were supposed to go out and get a job and make their way. Now, in Mecca, if you were looking for a job, the place to go was to the caravanserai. This was a big trading center. These camel caravans were coming from all directions. And there's lots of work to do to load them up, get them going, maybe go with them. Very, very similar to a seaport. The way the seaports were on the coast of America and Europe. That's where kids went. There were always jobs on the boats. So there were always jobs on the camel caravans. Camels had transformed this whole part of the world. Once camels were domesticated, people could travel as they never could before. They could cross these enormous desert wastes. Again, the way developments in shipping made it possible to cross oceans in Columbus's time and all. So he went down there to look for a job, and he was immediately recognized to be very, very good. This is the kind of employee we want. He was very energetic, very hardworking, very imaginative, very smart, and very good at dealing with people. People he had a charisma about him. He'd get people to do things and get them to do them happily. He's a good kind of leader. And so he was kind of moving up in the organization in that way. But he didn't know how high up in the organization he was going to move until the CEO of a large shipping outfit, camel shipping outfit, fell in love with him and married him.
There you go.
So he's now married to the boss, which again is a reminder that, women were not all subject creatures. I mean, this was a very wealthy woman with a big, Arabia-wide business going. He married her, and that gave him, for the first time in his life, leisure. He could take time off and think about things he had always wanted to think about and talk to people about them and so on. And it's then that the ethical, religious dimension of his life begins to appear. He is horrified by the fact that Arabia is people killing one another all the time. That there are all these factions and violent interchanges, etc. And he's also horrified by the kind of religion there was, this superstitious religion that believed in spooky things out in the desert and so on. a religion of fear, of various spirits. The best known ones were the jinn, which became the genie, like the genie in the bottle. But these were desert spirits, and people must placate them. And so religious concerns and social ethical concerns preoccupy him, and he now has time to think about them and do something about them, and we'll find out what next week.
2 weeks from now.